Hi, we are back talking about ABC, and at this point I just want to mention to you that it may be helpful to run over to the video for problem 4.29 or problem 4.31, just because those two problems specifically calculate some activity-based costing driver rates, and they come up with some unit costs. So I think sometimes seeing this done is a better way to understand it than just listening to me describe it. So you want to check out the problems that are out there before you try looking at the homework and stuff, but just to describe activity-based costing to you, I'll continue with the rest of this PowerPoint. So instead of using like one big pool, $30 per unit, or some departments rates, right? $10 per labor hour in assembly and $10 per machine hour in design or something like that. We come up with activity rates. So what an activity is each and every action you take as you're creating that product or service, or whatever it is that's your cost object. So there's going to be activities related that increase the costs. Now we still have this is overhead, right? So we still have direct materials and direct labor that we can trace, and we know those numbers, right? Those are our prime costs. We're not talking about that. What we're talking about is how to figure out that overhead, and we take some causal factor on all different levels, unit and non-unit. So every single activity that happens surrounding this product or service, whatever our cost object is, and we track every single one of them. Yeah, it gets involved, believe me. Just to give you an example of how it turns out in the end and how it can be very different. So we already did this plant-wide and the departmental for the robots and the race cars, and we came out with very different costs for both total unit and overhead. And if you look through the activity-based costing example, you'll see once again we get even a different idea for costs. But because the activity-based costing has considered all the activities individually with their own separate rates, that it's much more accurate. All right. So activity-based follows a cause and effect, and it may have nothing to do with the number of units or nothing to do with the number of labor hours. It's just that if you use only unit-based, you're going to get one product, subsidizing the other, and who knows how much anything really costs. So we want to break out every single activity and find a driver for each and every one of those. So here's kind of the picture of what it looks like. So costs are assigned using driver tracing and direct tracing, and you have some activities assigned using activity drivers. So when you're figuring out a cost, you still have your direct materials and direct labor, but then you also have these activity drivers. All right. So something I don't expect you to do in this class is identify every single activity. All right. So we're just going to go with problems that tell you, here's the activities. All right. But you can imagine if you are doing cost accounting, you'd have to identify all the activities. So you'd have to say one person they purchase wood, and they purchase lead, and they purchase metal, and it arrives, and purchasing is an activity, and unloading the raw materials is an activity. Transferring the raw materials to the machine is an activity. Setting up the machine to run a pencil batch is an activity. Taking the pencils off the machine is an activity. Putting the pencils in a box is an activity. Boxing the pencils. Shipping the right. So every single thing has an activity. Supervising is an activity, right? So everything's an activity, and you figure out how much do I spend for that activity, and add those all up. All right. So identify and define. I'm not going to ask you to do that. I'll just kind of tell you. Here's the activities. Assign the cost to the activities. Any secondary activities, identify cost objects and attribute them to that, calculate primary activity rates, assign activity cost to cost objects. All right, so identifying, step one, making a list. I'm not going to ask you to do this, I will just give you a list. Here's the activities, right? Here's a sample. Develop test programs, make probe cards, test products, set up lots, on and on and on. Right, sorry. So here's some examples of a list of activities. So you can imagine you're doing something and here's a whole list of activities. So we're going to find out a rate for each one of these and apply it to every different product we have. Then you assign it, right? So you figure out, well, how much of each one of those activities is this using? How much of each one of those activities is that using? All right. So there you go. You can split it up based on how much of that they do. Right? Then any secondary activity, treat it like the first activity, subdivide it out and figure out what its drivers are. Identify the cost objects and specify the amount of each activity. So now I know all my activities and all my little sub-activities, and I can say this cost object, this pencil, uses this many of all these different activities. This pencil uses this many of all these different activities and doesn't use some of them. And so we've got all the activities split up by the cost object, whatever it is. All right. Then you add them all up, right? You figure out how much each is going to be used by each product, and you calculate primary activity roles, assign the costs, and that's pretty much it. You figure out all the different activities, figure out a rate, and assign them to whatever your cost objects are. All right. Remember that classifying activities are not necessarily by units. It could be a batch, could be a product, could be facility. So in real life, it would be pretty time consuming to think of all the activities and to actually assign the costs to them, because you have to be able to track costs to activities, which is possible now that we have these big ERP systems like Oracle and SAP, things like that. But in the past, this would have not been something a person could really do realistically at a company, but now they can, so they do. But it's not necessarily all by a pencil. It could be, by the batches, because if you think about a setup for a machine, you're going to make a whole batch of pencils, something like that. So anyway, think about that. If a product level, maybe you're going to design a new kind of pencil, so I just need to design it one time, right? All right, so that's what's going on. Here's an example of a cardiac unit, and here's a bunch of activities. Here's what it would be traced to as a cost object, and here's what drives it. So for supervising nurses, that's an activity a nurse manager does. And what are they doing? Scheduling, coordinating. It's what is their cost object? The department, and what are we going to use as a driver? Percentage of time on each activity, right? So you figure out a way to divide it out, and you go with that. And I think it'll be a lot easier to see as a problem that we work. That's why I suggest go look at 4.29 and 4.31, and you'll see exactly what I mean. Chart of accounts. So here's what we've spent on things. So this is just if we add up all these accounts, how much have we spent? If we're using an activity-based costing view, we spent the same things, but we know more what the activity was than just the asset or supply or expense, right? So if you're looking at the chart of accounts, all you know is an expense, supervisor salary, supplies, salaries, computer, monitor. But if I go activity-based costing, I know how much I'm spending on each thing, so I can tell, is something too expensive or are we spending too much. So it's very useful, it's great. It's just not it's not that easy to do in real life. In the book it's easy because, you know, you get told all the activities. All right, so here you go. You would have activity, the driver, and what would be normal use and what immediate and intensive use. All right, and end up with our totals. All right, so I like this. This is a pretty good picture. We're going to work on this. So somebody has gone out and figured out that to treat patients, the rate is, so this is the activity, treating patients. $37.83 is the rate. All right, for a normal patient, right, we're going to need 500 units of that, so it's $18,915. For an intermediate patient, we're going to need 1,000 units, so it's $37,830. For an intensive care patient, we're going to need 1,500 units, so it's $56,745. Providing hygienic care is the activity. The rate for that is $25.22. And so how many hygienic care driver is labor hours, right? So for hygienic care, we've got 1125 labor hours for a normal, 562 for an intermediate, and 1913 for an intensive. So you multiply each of those out. So you take your activity, your driver rate is the same, but depending on your different product or your different service, it's going to come up with a different overhead. All right, so that's all we're going to talk about chapter 4. I really think chapter 4 is one of those chapters where you need to go work the problems before you go look at the homework. So please go to get the answers for problems 4, 28, 29, and 31. Work those on your own, or watch me work them on the videos, and then go try the homework and the quizzes, because I think this really is easy to I think it's very simple to understand once you work it out. I think it's truly, really one of those things you have to work out to understand. So I wish you good luck with that. Get in touch if you need me to do anything.